The wind was howling at 40 miles per hour across the barren Afghan mountains. Most snipers would have packed up their gear and called it impossible. The target was so far away it looked like a speck of dust through the scope. Military experts had calculated the odds, less than 2% chance of success at that distance. Equipment manufacturers said their rifles weren't designed for such extreme range. Even seasoned veterans shook their heads in disbelief. But she had already made up her mind. 3 years of ridicule, 3 years of being told she didn't belong, 3 years of proving herself over and over again. It all came down to this moment. Her finger rested gently on the trigger as she whispered the calculations under her breath. Wind speed, bullet drop, atmospheric pressure, target movement. Mathematics had never felt so personal. What happened next would rewrite the record books and silence every doubter who ever questioned whether she had what it took. This is the true story of the shot that changed everything. Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other kids in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their summers at the community pool or hanging out at the mall, she was in her grandfather's backyard, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts with a beat-up .22 rifle that was older than her parents. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran named Roberto, had noticed something special in his granddaughter's steady hands and unwavering focus from the time she could barely hold a gun. Roberto had never had a son, and Sarah's father showed no interest in firearms or military traditions. So when 8-year-old Sarah asked if she could learn to shoot, Roberto saw an opportunity to pass down something precious. He taught her the fundamentals slowly and carefully: breathing techniques, proper stance, sight alignment, and most importantly, respect for the weapon and what it could do. By the time Sarah turned 12, she was outshotting grown men at the local shooting range. The old-timers who gathered there every weekend would watch in amazement as this skinny girl with pigtails consistently hit targets they struggled with. Some were impressed, others felt threatened by her natural ability. Comments like, "lucky shot," and "beginner's luck" followed her around, but Sarah didn't pay attention. She was too focused on the satisfaction of hearing the metallic ping when her bullet found its mark. High school brought new challenges. While her peers were discovering makeup and dating, Sarah was spending her afternoons on the school rifle team. The coach, Mrs. Henderson, was a former Olympic qualifier who recognized exceptional talent when she saw it. Under her guidance, Sarah's skills grew exponentially. She learned about wind reading, ballistics, and the mental game that separated good shooters from great ones.
The ridicule started small.
Classmates would make jokes about her being a gun nut or suggest she was trying to be someone she wasn't. The comments stung, but they also fueled her determination. Sarah began keeping a notebook where she recorded every practice session, every competition result, and yes, every snide comment. She told herself that one day she would prove them all wrong. Her junior year brought the state championships. Sarah had been dominating local and regional competitions, but state was different. The best young shooters from across Texas would be there, many from wealthy schools with expensive equipment and professional coaches. Sarah's gear was modest, a reliable but basic rifle that her grandfather had helped her buy with money from her part-time job at the local hardware store. The morning of the competition, Sarah's hands were steadier than they had ever been. She had visualized this moment hundreds of times. The range fell silent as competitors took their positions. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and began the slow, methodical process of engaging each target.
One by one, her shots found their marks.
The electronic scoring system confirmed what everyone could see. Sarah wasn't just hitting the targets, she was hitting them in the exact center with mechanical precision. By the end of the first round, murmurs had started among the coaches and spectators. Who was this girl from a small town nobody had heard of? The final round determined the state champion? Sarah's biggest competition came from Marcus Chen, a senior from an elite private school in Dallas whose parents had spent thousands on custom equipment and private coaching. Marcus had been the favorite coming into the competition, with newspaper articles already written about his likely victory in college recruitment prospects. As the final round began, Sarah found herself in an almost meditative state. The noise of the crowd faded away. Definitely.
You would...
The pressure of the moment seemed to dissolve. There was only her, the rifle, and the targets downrange. She thought about her grandfather, about all the hours they had spent together in his backyard, about his stories of Korea and the importance of staying calm under pressure. Her first shot was perfect. Then her second. By the third shot, the entire range had gone quiet. Even the other competitors had stopped to watch. Sarah's concentration was so complete that she didn't notice the silence or the stares. She simply continued her rhythm: breathe, aim, squeeze, follow through. When the final buzzer sounded, Sarah set down her rifle and waited for the scores to be calculated. She felt good about her performance, but tried not to get her hopes up. The electronic scoreboard flickered as the results were processed, and then the numbers appeared. Sarah had not just won, she had broken the state record by a margin that shocked everyone present. The ceremony that followed felt surreal. Sarah stood on the top step of the podium, listening to her national anthem and watching her state flag rise above the others. In the crowd, she could see her grandfather wiping tears from his eyes. Her parents, who had always been supportive but never quite understood her passion, looked proud and slightly bewildered. Where
is...
But it was the conversation after the ceremony that changed everything. A woman in military dress uniform approached Sarah and her family. She introduced herself as Captain Yennefer Walsh from the Army Marksmanship Unit. She had been at the competition not as a spectator, but as a scout looking for exceptional talent.
This is the book. It's about history, but as a spectator behind history is bad as happening.
Captain Walsh explained that the Army was always searching for individuals with Sarah's combination of natural ability and competitive drive. She talked about opportunities for advanced training, college scholarships, and eventually, if Sarah was interested and qualified, positions in special operations units where precision shooting was critical.
The idea had never occurred to Sarah before. She had always thought of shooting as a sport, a hobby she shared with her grandfather, a way to prove herself to doubters.
But Captain Walsh was talking about something else entirely, using her skills to serve her country, to be part of something bigger than competitions and trophies. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about the conversation.
The military had always seemed like something other people did, something for boys who didn't know what else to do with their lives. But Captain Walsh had painted a different picture. She talked about elite units where the best of the best pushed the boundaries of what was possible, where precision and dedication could save lives and complete missions that others couldn't. Sarah's grandfather wasn't surprised when she told him about her interest in the military the next morning. He had seen the focus and discipline in her that reminded him of the best soldiers he had served with in Korea. He told her that if she was serious about this path, she needed to be prepared for challenges that would make state championships look easy. The decision to enlist came during her senior year. While her classmates were planning for college or trying to figure out what to do after graduation, Sarah was working with a military recruiter to chart a course that would take her from basic training to advanced marksmanship schools, and eventually to specialized units. Her high school guidance counselor thought she was making a mistake. Several teachers tried to talk her out of it, suggesting that someone with her academic record could get scholarships to good colleges and pursue a normal career.
Couldn't Chief be Grady?
Even some of her family members expressed concerns about a young woman choosing such a dangerous and unconventional path. But Sarah had made up her mind. The ridicule that had followed her through high school, the suggestion that she was somehow less feminine or less normal because of her shooting skills, had only strengthened her resolve. She was tired of having to justify her passion and her abilities. In the military, she hoped to find a place where excellence was recognized and rewarded, regardless of gender or background. The night before she left for basic training, Sarah sat in her grandfather's backyard one last time, holding the old .22 rifle that had started it all.
Roberto sat beside her, sharing stories about his own military service and offering advice about staying true to herself even when facing pressure to conform. He told her that the military would challenge her in ways she couldn't imagine.
That there would be people who doubted her and situations where she would have to prove herself over and over again.
But he also told her that if she stayed focused on her goals and remembered why she started this journey, she would succeed in ways that would surprise even her.
As the sun set behind the Texas hills, Sarah made a promise to herself and to her grandfather.
Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles she would face, whatever doubters she would encounter, she would never give up on her dream. She would push herself to become the best sniper the military had ever seen. And she would do it while remaining true to the values and work ethic that had brought her this far. The next morning, as Sarah boarded the bus that would take her to basic training, she carried with her not just the skills her grandfather had taught her, but also the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving. She was ready to take on the world. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The humidity hit her like a wall the moment she stepped off the bus. And the drill sergeants made it clear from day one that her shooting trophies and state records meant absolutely nothing here. Everyone started from zero, and everyone would be tested in ways that went far beyond marksmanship. The physical demands were intense but manageable for Sarah, who had maintained excellent fitness throughout high school.
2005 to 2014, the world's most decisive life partner in Efferlo.
What surprised her was how much of basic training focused on mental toughness and teamwork rather than individual skills. The drill sergeant seemed determined to break down every recruit's sense of individual identity and rebuild them as soldiers who could function as part of a unit. Sarah's first real challenge came during the second week when her drill sergeant, Staff Sergeant Martinez, called her out in front of the entire platoon. He had reviewed her file and knew about her shooting background, but instead of treating it as an asset, he seemed determined to prove that civilian shooting skills didn't translate to military effectiveness. During the platoon's first trip to the firing range, Staff Sergeant Martinez made Sarah use the standard M16 rifle with iron sights instead of the scoped weapons that other recruits with shooting experience were allowed to use. He wanted to see if her abilities were real or just the result of fancy equipment and controlled conditions. The targets were at 300 meters, much closer than what Sarah was used to in competition, but the M16 was also very different from her precision rifles. The trigger was heavier, the sights were crude compared to what she was accustomed to, and the ammunition was military surplus rather than the match-grade bullets she had used in competitions. As Sarah settled into her shooting position, she could hear other recruits whispering. Some had heard about her background and were curious to see if she could live up to the reputation.
Others seemed skeptical, making comments about how shooting paper targets was different from real military applications.
Sarah blocked out the noise and focused on the fundamentals her grandfather had taught her years earlier. She adjusted her position to accommodate the different rifle, took careful note of the wind conditions, and began engaging the targets with the same methodical approach that had served her well in competitions. Her first shot was slightly off-center but still well within the acceptable range. The second shot was better. By the fifth shot, she had adapted completely to the new weapon and was putting rounds exactly where she wanted them. When the targets were brought back for scoring, Sarah had achieved a perfect score, something that happened rarely during basic training and never with iron sights at that distance. Staff Sergeant Martinez examined the target himself, then looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. He didn't praise her publicly, but that evening he pulled her aside and told her that her performance had been noted by higher-ranking instructors. There might be opportunities for advanced training if she continued to excel.
The remainder of basic training passed quickly.
Sarah excelled not just in marksmanship but in all aspects of military training. She learned to navigate with map and compass, to move tactically across different types of terrain, to maintain her equipment under harsh conditions, and most importantly, to work as part of a team. Her fellow recruits gradually accepted her as one of their own. The initial skepticism about her background gave way to appreciation for her skills and her willingness to help others improve their own shooting abilities. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial instructor, helping struggling shooters understand the basics of sight alignment and trigger control. After graduating from basic training with honors, Sarah moved on to advanced individual training for her military occupational specialty as an infantry soldier.
This was where she would receive more specialized training in weapon systems, tactics, and combat skills that would prepare her for deployment. The infantry school was more challenging than basic training in every way. The physical demands were greater, the academic requirements more complex, and the standards for performance much higher. Sarah was one of only 3 women in her class of 45 soldiers.
And the instructors made it clear that gender would not be a factor in determining who succeeded or failed.
Her shooting skills continued to impress instructors, but she quickly learned that infantry training involved much more than marksmanship.
She needed to master a variety of weapon systems, understand small unit tactics, learn to read terrain and weather conditions, and develop the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. One of her instructors, Sergeant First Class Johnson, had served multiple combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, and he took a special interest in soldiers who showed exceptional potential. After observing Sarah's performance for several weeks, he recommended her for evaluation by the Army's Special Operations Recruiting Team.
The evaluation process was grueling. Sarah underwent psychological testing, additional physical fitness assessments, and interviews with senior non-commissioned officers and officers who specialized in identifying candidates for elite units. They were looking for more than just shooting ability. They wanted soldiers who could handle extreme stress, work independently when necessary, and maintain effectiveness in situations where failure could have life or death consequences. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah was required to engage targets at various distances while under simulated enemy fire.
Instructors used blank ammunition and explosive simulators to create a chaotic, stressful environment that mimicked combat conditions.
Many candidates struggled to maintain accuracy under such pressure, but Sarah found that the stress actually helped her focus.
As explosions went off around her and instructors shouted conflicting orders, Sarah entered the same meditative state she had discovered during competitions. The external chaos faded into background noise, and she methodically engaged each target with the precision that had become her trademark. Her performance was so impressive that instructors had to verify that her rifle was actually functioning properly. The groupings were too tight to believe. The evaluation concluded with an interview with a colonel who had commanded special operations units in combat. He reviewed Sarah's performance data and asked pointed questions about her motivations, her long-term goals, and her willingness to undertake missions that most people couldn't imagine. Sarah answered honestly. About her desire to push herself to the highest levels of military service, her willingness to sacrifice comfort and normalcy for the opportunity to serve in an elite capacity, and her belief that her unique skills could contribute to mission success in ways that might save American lives. 2 weeks later, Sarah received orders to report to the Special Operations Training Course.
She would be one of only 12 soldiers selected from hundreds of candidates and one of only 2 women ever chosen for the program. The training would last 18 months and would push her physically, mentally, and emotionally beyond anything she had experienced.
Before departing for the Special Operations Course, Sarah was granted 2 weeks of leave to visit family. Returning to her hometown felt strange after months of military training. Everything seemed smaller and quieter than she remembered. Her high school friends were finishing their first year of college or starting entry-level jobs, living lives that now seemed almost incomprehensibly different from her own path.
Her grandfather was waiting for her at the family dinner where everyone had gathered to celebrate her success and wish her well for the next phase of training.
He listened as she described the challenges she had faced and overcome, nodding with understanding that came from his own military experience.
Later that evening, as they sat once again in his backyard, Roberto told Sarah that he was proud of her but also worried about the path she was choosing.
Special operations units faced dangers that regular soldiers never encountered, and the demands of that lifestyle could change a person in fundamental ways. Sarah appreciated his concern, but she also knew that this was where she belonged. The conventional military had been a good starting point, but she needed to be in a place where her abilities could be fully utilized and constantly challenged. She wanted to work alongside the best soldiers in the world, tackling missions that required the highest levels of skill and dedication. Her grandfather understood. He told her about soldiers he had known in Korea who had possessed that same drive to excel, that same need to test themselves against the most difficult challenges. Some had been the finest warriors he had ever encountered, but the cost of that excellence had been significant in terms of personal relationships and normal life experiences. As Sarah prepared to leave for special operations training, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day she picked up the old .22 rifle.
She had gone from being a curious child learning to shoot tin cans to being selected for some of the most challenging military training in the world. The journey had required sacrifices and had taken her far from the comfortable, predictable life that most of her peers were living.
I was living 60% of the most of her peers were living 10.
But she had no regrets. Every challenge she had faced, every person who had doubted her abilities, every moment of struggle and triumph had led to this opportunity. She was about to begin training that would prepare her for missions that existed at the absolute cutting edge of military capability.
The night before departing for the Special Operations course, Sarah wrote a letter to her future self.
In it, she described her current mindset, her goals, and her determination to succeed no matter what obstacles lay ahead. She sealed the letter and left it with her grandfather, asking him to give it back to her when she completed the training. As she boarded the plane that would take her to her new assignment, Sarah carried with her the confidence that had sustained her through every previous challenge. She was ready to discover just how far her abilities could take her, and she was prepared to push herself harder than ever before to earn her place among the military's elite. The Special Operations Training Course at Fort Bragg was designed to identify and develop soldiers capable of operating in the most demanding environments imaginable. From the moment Sarah arrived, it was clear that everything she had experienced in her military career up to that point had been preparation for this ultimate test.
The course began with 6 weeks of intensive physical conditioning that pushed every candidate to their breaking point.
18-hour days started before dawn, with runs that covered terrain so challenging that completing them was considered an achievement in itself. Candidates carried progressively heavier packs over longer distances, all while maintaining the mental alertness necessary to complete complex navigation and tactical exercises.
Sarah discovered that her years of competitive shooting had given her advantages beyond marksmanship. The mental discipline required to maintain focus under pressure translated perfectly to the psychological demands of special operations training.
While other candidates struggled with the stress and uncertainty, Sarah found herself adapting to the chaos and maintaining her performance standards even when exhausted. The first major selection event occurred during the fourth week. Candidates were given a series of shooting challenges designed to test not just accuracy, but adaptability and decision-making under extreme time pressure.
They had to engage targets at various distances using different weapon systems, all while moving through a course that simulated urban and rural combat environments. Sarah's performance during this exercise was so exceptional that instructors initially suspected equipment malfunction.
She had engaged 57 targets at distances ranging from 25 to 800 meters, achieving a hit rate of 98% while maintaining the speed necessary to complete the course within the time limit. No candidate in the program's history had achieved that combination of speed and accuracy.
Word of her performance spread quickly through the training cadre.
Senior instructors who had served in the most elite units began paying special attention to her development, recognizing that they might be witnessing the emergence of a truly exceptional operator.
The advanced marksmanship phase of training introduced Sarah to weapons and techniques that existed at the cutting edge of military technology. She learned to use rifle systems designed specifically for extreme long-range engagement, with scopes and ammunition that represented the finest precision equipment available to American forces. Her primary instructor for this phase was Master Sergeant David Torres, a legendary sniper who had completed multiple combat deployments and held several military marksmanship records. Torres had trained hundreds of snipers during his career, and he immediately recognized that Sarah possessed abilities that set her apart from even the most skilled soldiers he had worked with. Under Torres's guidance, Sarah learned advanced ballistics calculation, environmental analysis, and target identification techniques. She studied the effects of altitude, humidity, and temperature on bullet trajectory.
She learned to read wind patterns at multiple distances simultaneously and to account for the rotation of the Earth when engaging targets at extreme range. The technical aspects of long-range shooting fascinated Sarah, but she was equally drawn to the mental and emotional demands of the sniper role.
Torres explained that snipers often worked alone or in very small teams, sometimes for days or weeks at a time, requiring levels of patience and self-reliance that challenged even experienced soldiers. During one training exercise, Sarah was tasked with infiltrating a simulated enemy position and maintaining observation for 72 hours before taking a single shot at a high-value target.
She had to remain undetected in hostile territory while gathering intelligence and waiting for the precise moment when conditions would allow for a successful engagement. The exercise tested every aspect of her training.
She had to navigate difficult terrain at night, establish a concealed position that would remain undetectable during enemy patrols, maintain alertness and readiness despite fatigue and discomfort, and finally execute a perfect shot when the opportunity presented itself.
Sarah's performance exceeded expectations.
Not only did she remain undetected throughout the exercise, but her shot placement was so precise that instructors had to use measuring equipment to verify the impact point. She had hit the target exactly where intended from a distance of 200 meters under challenging wind conditions. Master Sergeant Torres told Sarah privately that her abilities reminded him of only one or two other snipers he had encountered during his entire career. He recommended her for advanced specialty training that was reserved for the most exceptional candidates, training that would prepare her for missions requiring capabilities beyond what standard special operations snipers could provide.
The advanced training took place at a classified location and involved techniques and equipment that Sarah was required to never discuss with unauthorized personnel. She learned to engage targets at distances that most snipers considered impossible, using specialized ammunition and rifle systems that pushed the boundaries of what was technically feasible. Her instructors were civilian contractors and military personnel who represented the absolute pinnacle of long-range shooting expertise. They taught her mathematical calculations that accounted for variables most snipers never considered, and they introduced her to equipment so sophisticated that it required specialized training just to operate properly. Sarah thrived in this environment. The combination of cutting-edge technology and ultimate precision challenges was exactly what she had been seeking throughout her military career. She found herself consistently achieving results that impressed even these world-class instructors, regularly hitting targets at distances that had previously been considered beyond the effective range of small arms. One instructor, a former Marine sniper who now worked as a civilian contractor, told Sarah that she possessed natural abilities that couldn't be taught. He explained that while technique and equipment could be learned, the intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental conditions that she demonstrated was something that occurred perhaps once in a generation. As her training neared completion, Sarah received word that she would be assigned to a classified special operations unit that specialized in high-value target elimination and strategic reconnaissance. The unit's existence was known only to a small number of senior military and intelligence officials, and its missions were among the most sensitive and dangerous undertaken by American forces.
Before receiving her final assignment, Sarah was required to complete a graduation exercise that would test everything she had learned during 18 months of intensive training. She would be inserted into a remote area and tasked with infiltrating an enemy position, gathering specific intelligence, and eliminating a high-value target at a range that would require perfect execution of every technique she had mastered.
The exercise location was chosen specifically for its extreme difficulty. The terrain was mountainous and barren, offering little concealment and requiring precise navigation skills. Weather conditions were harsh and unpredictable. The simulated enemy force consisted of experienced military personnel who understood counter-sniper techniques and were actively searching for infiltrators. Sarah was inserted alone under cover of darkness, carrying only the equipment she could transport on foot across miles of difficult terrain. She had 72 hours to complete her mission objectives, and failure would result in dismissal from the program, regardless of her previous performance. The first 24 hours were devoted to movement and reconnaissance. Sarah covered 12 miles of mountainous terrain while avoiding detection by enemy patrols that were actively searching for her.
She established multiple potential shooting positions and conducted detailed surveillance of the target area, identifying the specific location where she would have the best opportunity for mission success.
The target was a training instructor role-playing as an enemy commander who would appear at predetermined times in various locations throughout the exercise area.
Sarah had to identify the correct target among multiple individuals and engage at the moment when conditions would allow for mission completion while maintaining her own security. On the second day, Sarah identified her target and began preparing for the engagement.
The shot would be at a distance of 2,800 meters, requiring perfect calculation of environmental conditions and absolute precision in execution.
She had one opportunity to succeed, as the noise of her shot would immediately compromise her position and trigger an intensive search by the opposing force. Sarah spent hours calculating every variable that could affect her shot. This was the first cause of shot out there for dialogue. Wind speed and direction, humidity levels, altitude differences, even the time of day, and corresponding light conditions were factored into her preparation. She mentally rehearsed the engagement sequence dozens of times, visualizing every aspect of the shot and the immediate action she would take afterward. When the moment arrived, Sarah's training and natural abilities combined in perfect harmony. The shot was executed flawlessly, with the simulated ammunition striking the target exactly where she had intended.
Before the opposing force could react, Sarah had already begun her extraction movement, disappearing into terrain that offered concealment and multiple escape routes. She successfully evaded capture during the remaining 24 hours of the exercise and was extracted at the predetermined location without having been detected by the enemy force.
Her performance had been monitored by observers throughout the exercise, and the consensus among instructors was that her execution had been perfect in every measurable aspect. At the graduation ceremony, Sarah was recognized as the distinguished graduate of her class, an honor that reflected not just her exceptional performance, but also her potential for future mission success. She was one of only 8 candidates who had successfully completed the entire 18-month program, and her overall scores had established new benchmarks for several categories of performance. Master Sergeant Torres presented Sarah with her graduation certificate and told her that she was ready for missions that would test her abilities in ways that training exercises never could. He reminded her that her real education was just beginning, and that combat operations would present challenges that no training program could fully replicate. As Sarah prepared for her first operational assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From shooting tin cans in her grandfather's backyard to graduating from the most demanding sniper training in the world, every step had prepared her for the responsibility she was about to assume. She thought about the doubters who had questioned whether she belonged in this elite community, and she felt satisfaction in knowing that her performance had proven them wrong. But more importantly, she felt ready to serve her country at the highest level, using abilities that had been developed through years of dedication and sacrifice. Sarah's first operational assignment took her to Afghanistan as part of a classified special operations unit designated Task Force Shadow. The unit consisted of 12 highly trained soldiers specializing in direct action missions, strategic reconnaissance, and high-value target elimination in the most dangerous areas of operation. The forward operating base where Sarah was stationed looked nothing like the training facility she had become accustomed to. Located in a remote valley surrounded by hostile territory, the base was essentially a collection of reinforced structures and defensive positions carved into the mountainous terrain.
Every aspect of daily life was governed by security protocols designed to minimize the unit's vulnerability to enemy attack.
Sarah's team leader was Major Richard Stone, a career special operations officer who had commanded similar units throughout multiple combat deployments. Stone had reviewed Sarah's training records and was interested to see how her exceptional skills would translate to real-world operations, but he was also skeptical about integrating any new team member into a unit that had developed cohesion through months of working together in combat conditions. The other team members were equally accomplished specialists, each with combat experience and expertise in specific areas critical to mission success. Initially, they were polite but distant with Sarah, taking a wait-and-see approach to determine whether she could contribute effectively to their operations. Sarah's first mission was a reconnaissance operation designed to gather intelligence on enemy movement patterns in a valley that intelligence analysts suspected was being used as a supply route for insurgent forces. The mission would require her to establish an observation position and maintain surveillance for an extended period while providing real-time intelligence to commanders planning future operations. Working with her spotter, Sergeant First Class Miguel Rodriguez, Sarah infiltrated the target area under cover of darkness and established a concealed position that offered excellent visibility of the suspected supply route. Rodriguez was initially skeptical of working with someone who had no combat experience, but he was curious about the reputation that had preceded Sarah's arrival. The observation position was located on a ridge approximately 1,800 meters from the area under surveillance. Using high-powered optics, Sarah and Rodriguez could observe enemy activity while remaining far enough away to avoid detection. The mission required them to remain in position for up to 1 week, documenting patterns of movement and identifying high-value individuals who might be targeted in future operations. During the third day of surveillance, Sarah identified a group of individuals who appeared to be coordinating supply operations in the valley below. Using her spotting scope, she was able to provide detailed descriptions of personnel, vehicles, and equipment that proved valuable for intelligence analysts trying to understand enemy logistics capabilities. More importantly, Sarah demonstrated the patience and attention to detail that distinguished effective snipers from merely good shooters. While maintaining constant vigilance for potential threats to their position, she methodically documented every aspect of enemy activity, building a comprehensive picture of operations in the area that would inform future mission planning. The reconnaissance mission concluded successfully with Sarah and Rodriguez extracting without having been detected by enemy forces. The intelligence they gathered led directly to a series of interdiction operations that disrupted enemy supply lines and eliminated several high-value targets identified during their surveillance. Major Stone was impressed with Sarah's performance during her first operation, but he was more interested in how she would perform under direct combat conditions. Her next assignment would provide that opportunity. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-ranking enemy commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces was operating from a compound in a remote mountain village.
The compound was heavily defended and located in terrain that made conventional assault extremely difficult and costly.
The mission profile was perfect for Sarah's specialized capabilities. The target would need to be eliminated from extreme range, requiring precision shooting under challenging environmental conditions. The shot would have to be taken from a position that allowed the team to extract without being overwhelmed by enemy response forces. Sarah spent 2 days studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports about the target area. The compound was located in a valley surrounded by steep mountain ridges, with the nearest feasible shooting position approximately 2,400 meters away. Environmental conditions in the area were notoriously difficult, with unpredictable wind patterns and extreme temperature variations that would significantly affect bullet trajectory. Working with the team's intelligence analysts, Sarah developed a detailed mission plan that accounted for infiltration routes, shooting positions, environmental factors, and extraction procedures. The plan required perfect timing and coordination, as the team would have only a narrow window of opportunity to complete the mission before enemy reinforcements could respond. The infiltration began 2 days before the planned engagement. Sarah and 3 other team members moved on foot through hostile territory, traveling primarily at night to avoid detection. They carried specialized equipment including Sarah's custom rifle system, advanced optics, environmental monitoring devices, and communications gear necessary for coordination with command elements. Establishing the shooting position required careful preparation. Sarah selected a location that offered the necessary line of sight to the target while providing concealment and multiple escape routes. She and her spotter spent hours camouflaging their position and preparing for the shot that would determine mission success. Environmental conditions on the morning of the engagement were challenging, but manageable. Crosswinds at varying altitudes would affect bullet trajectory, and atmospheric pressure changes needed to be factored into ballistic calculations.
Using advanced weather monitoring equipment, Sarah calculated the precise adjustments necessary to compensate for these variables.
The target appeared at the expected time and location, moving between buildings within the compound according to patterns that intelligence analysts had identified during weeks of surveillance.
Sarah had a window of approximately 30 seconds to identify the target positively and execute the shot before he disappeared into a structure that would prevent engagement.
Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see the target clearly despite the extreme distance. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but the reality of engaging an actual enemy combatant was different from any training scenario she had experienced. This shot would determine whether a dangerous enemy commander continued to threaten coalition forces and Afghan civilians. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into the shooting position that had become second nature through thousands of hours of practice.
The mathematical calculations that determined her scope adjustments were based on environmental data that Rodriguez was providing in real time. Every aspect of her preparation had been methodical and precise.
When Sarah squeezed the trigger, the rifle recoiled exactly as expected, and she immediately began tracking the bullet's flight path through her scope. At extreme range, the bullet's time of flight was long enough that environmental conditions could change during its trajectory, but her calculations had accounted for these possibilities.
The bullet struck the target exactly where Sarah had aimed, achieving the mission objective with a single shot that demonstrated the capabilities that had made her selection for special operations possible. The enemy commander was eliminated instantly, disrupting coordination of attacks that intelligence reports indicated were being planned against coalition forces.
Before enemy security forces could respond effectively, Sarah's team had already begun their extraction movement. They had planned multiple escape routes and established communication protocols that allowed them to coordinate their withdrawal while maintaining security throughout the process. The successful completion of this mission established Sarah's reputation within the special operations community. Word of her performance spread among units operating in the region, and she began receiving requests from other teams who wanted her capabilities for their most challenging missions.
Over the following months, Sarah completed a series of increasingly difficult assignments that tested every aspect of her training and abilities.
She eliminated high-value targets in urban environments, provided overwatch for direct action missions, and conducted reconnaissance operations in areas where conventional forces could not operate safely. Each mission added to her experience and confirmed that her exceptional abilities could be translated into operational success under the most demanding conditions.
Her team members, initially skeptical of her lack of combat experience, became strong advocates for her capabilities and professionalism. Major Stone recommended Sarah for advanced operational assignments that would take advantage of her unique skills while contributing to strategic objectives that extended beyond routine special operations missions.
These assignments would involve working with intelligence agencies and other specialized units on operations that required capabilities at the very edge of what was technically possible.
As Sarah prepared for these new challenges, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small Texas town to the cutting edge of military operations.
Every person who had doubted her abilities, every challenge she had overcome, every moment of training and preparation had contributed to her current capabilities. But she also understood that her greatest test was still ahead. The missions she would be undertaking would require not just exceptional shooting skills, but also the judgment, adaptability, and mental toughness that could only be developed through experience in the most demanding operational environments. Sarah was ready for whatever challenges awaited her. She had proven herself at every level, and she was prepared to continue pushing the boundaries of what was possible in service to her country and the teammates who depended on her skills. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility that Sarah had never seen before. All those teams are also contended with surfaces.
Representatives from multiple intelligence agencies sat around a conference table with maps, satellite imagery, and classified documents that painted a picture of an operation unlike anything she had previously undertaken. The target was a terrorist leader who had been responsible for coordinating attacks that killed hundreds of coalition forces and thousands of Afghan civilians.
Intelligence reports indicated that this individual would be attending a meeting in a remote mountain compound that was considered impregnable to conventional assault. The location had been chosen specifically because of its defensive advantages, steep approaches, multiple layers of security, and terrain that made helicopter insertion impossible. The only feasible approach would require a shot at a distance that pushed beyond the established limits of military sniper capabilities. Initial calculations suggested the range would be approximately 3,800 meters, a distance that existed at the very edge of what was technically possible even with the most advanced equipment available.
Colonel Patricia Hayes, the mission commander, this opportunity represented potentially the last chance to neutralize a threat that intelligence analysts considered one of the highest priorities in the region.
Sarah listened to the briefing with growing excitement and apprehension.
The technical challenges of a shot at that distance were enormous. Environmental variables that were manageable at shorter ranges became critical factors that could determine success or failure. The margin for error would be virtually non-existent. Master Sergeant Torres, who had been brought in as a technical consultant for the mission, reviewed the ballistic calculations with Sarah. There is a sophistication of trust by Sarah Boss. The bullet's time of flight would be nearly 8 seconds, during which atmospheric conditions could change significantly. Wind patterns at different altitudes would affect the trajectory in ways that required complex mathematical modeling to predict accurately. The rifle system selected for the mission was a prototype that incorporated the most advanced technology available to American forces. The scope was equipped with ballistic computers that could process environmental data in real time, and the ammunition was specially manufactured to maintain stability and accuracy at extreme range. Sarah spent 2 weeks preparing for the mission at a classified test facility, where she could practice at distances approaching the target range. Working with Torres and other technical specialists, she refined her understanding of the equipment and environmental factors that would determine mission success. The practice sessions revealed challenges that had not been apparent in theoretical planning. At extreme range, even minor variations in ammunition performance became significant factors. Environmental conditions that seemed stable at shorter distances proved to be constantly changing variables that required continuous adjustment and recalculation. Sarah's natural abilities and years of training proved essential during this preparation phase. She demonstrated an intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental effects that allowed her to make accurate predictions about bullet behavior, under conditions that challenged even the most sophisticated computer models. As the mission date approached, intelligence reports confirmed that the target would be present at the expected location and time. The operation would require perfect coordination between multiple teams responsible for infiltration, surveillance, and extraction under conditions where any mistake could result in mission failure and potential loss of American lives. The infiltration began 3 days before the planned engagement. Sarah's team moved through hostile territory using routes that had been selected to minimize contact with enemy forces, while positioning her within range of the target compound. They traveled primarily at night, carrying specialized equipment that would be essential for mission success. Establishing the shooting position required unprecedented attention to detail. The distance to the target meant that even minor errors in positioning could result in significant deviation from the intended point of impact. Sarah and her team spent an entire day preparing the position, using surveying equipment to determine exact ranges and angles. Environmental monitoring equipment was positioned to provide real-time data about atmospheric conditions along the entire bullet trajectory. Weather patterns in the mountainous terrain were complex and unpredictable, with wind conditions varying significantly at different altitudes between Sarah's position and the target compound. The night before the engagement, Sarah reviewed her calculations one final time. The mathematical complexity of the shot required her to account for variables that most snipers never considered: the rotation of the Earth, atmospheric pressure gradients, even the specific temperature and humidity conditions that would exist at the moment of firing. Rodriguez, her spotter, had been working with meteorological specialists to develop the most accurate possible prediction of environmental conditions during the engagement window. Their analysis suggested a brief period when atmospheric conditions would be optimal for the extreme range shot that Sarah would attempt. As dawn approached on the day of the mission, Sarah settled into the shooting position that had become her world for the past 24 hours. Every aspect of her preparation had been methodical and precise, but she understood that success would ultimately depend on skills and instincts that could not be taught or programmed. Through her scope, Sarah could see the target compound more than 2 miles away. The magnification was so extreme that atmospheric distortion created a shimmering effect that required careful interpretation to distinguish actual movement from optical illusion. Spotting and identifying the target at that distance would be almost as challenging as making the shot itself. Intelligence reports indicated that the target would appear during a specific time window based on communication intercepts and surveillance of his security procedures. Sarah would have perhaps 60 seconds to identify him positively among other individuals and execute a shot that represented the culmination of everything she had learned throughout her military career. When the moment arrived, Sarah's training and natural abilities combined in perfect harmony. She could see movement in the target compound, but identifying specific individuals required patience and careful observation through the high-powered optic that revealed details invisible to the naked eye. The target appeared exactly as intelligence reports had predicted, moving between buildings according to security patterns that had been documented during weeks of surveillance. Through her scope, Sarah could see him clearly despite the extraordinary distance,
and she began the final sequence of preparations that would determine mission success. Environmental conditions were as favorable as could be expected for such an extreme shot.
Wind patterns were relatively stable, atmospheric pressure was consistent, and visibility was excellent despite the early morning hour. Rodriguez provided real-time updates on any changes that might affect bullet trajectory.
Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into the shooting position that had become instinctive through years of practice. The ballistic calculations that determined her scope settings represented the most complex analysis she had ever undertaken, accounting for every variable that could influence bullet behavior over the extraordinary distance to target.
When Sarah squeezed the trigger, the rifle performed exactly as expected, launching the specially manufactured bullet on a trajectory that would take nearly 8 seconds to reach its intended destination. During that time, she tracked the bullet's path through her scope while maintaining her shooting position in case a follow-up shot became necessary.
The bullet struck the target with precision that validated every aspect of Sarah's preparation and training.
At a distance of 3,800 meters under challenging environmental conditions, she had achieved a shot that redefined the boundaries of military sniper capabilities and eliminated a threat that had eluded coalition forces for years.
The mission's success reverberated throughout the special operations community and intelligence agencies that had been tracking the target for months. Sarah's shot had not only eliminated a high-value enemy, but had also demonstrated capabilities that would influence future mission planning and equipment development.
Word of the shot spread beyond military circles, reaching defense contractors, ballistics experts, and sniper trainers who understood the technical achievement that Sarah had accomplished. The combination of distance, environmental conditions, and mission pressure had created challenges that pushed beyond previous limits of what was considered possible.
But for Sarah, the satisfaction came not from breaking records or impressing experts, but from knowing that her skills had contributed to eliminating a threat that had been responsible for the deaths of countless innocents. The years of training, the doubters who had questioned her abilities, the sacrifices required to reach this level. Everything had led to this moment, when her unique capabilities made a difference that mattered.
As she prepared to extract from the shooting position, Sarah thought about her grandfather and the lessons he had taught her in his backyard so many years earlier. The fundamentals he had emphasized: patience, precision, respect for the weapon and its capabilities, had remained constant throughout her journey from tin cans on fence posts to the most challenging shot in military history.
The mission that had begun with ridicule and doubt had concluded with a demonstration of capabilities that silenced every skeptic. Sarah had proven that exceptional ability, properly developed and applied, could achieve results that others considered impossible. She had earned her place among the finest snipers in military history, and she had done it while remaining true to the values and work ethic that had guided her from the beginning.